Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lucy and I'm a final year medical student now at the University of Nottingham. As it's the beginning of a new academic year and so many medical students are starting on their journey through medical school, I thought I'd make an advice video where I'm just going to talk about all the things that if I could do medical school all over again and start as a first year again, the things that I would do differently. Most of these things are centred around study techniques, so even if you're second, third, fourth year, you could still get something out of this video because, to be honest, I don't think I've perfected my study routine until pretty much fourth year, maybe even this year. My results have improved every year I've been at medical school. They've gradually got better and better every year. I've always been a student that works really hard. If you want to see all my results and sort of my previous videos about studying and things, then you can find them on my channel. But I've never been really disappointed with my results. I've always thought that they were good enough. But I think what I learned in fourth year was that I could get those results by working in a very, very efficient way. And I think my revision period for fourth year was actually one of my most relaxed that I've had while being at medical school, even though the fourth year exams were probably the hardest that we've ever done. I'm just going to get straight into the tips now. So the first thing to say is that it's really important when you start medical school that you find the technique that works best for you. The techniques I use won't necessarily suit everyone, but I really think it's worth taking the time to try different things. I started medical school basically studying in the way that I studied for A-levels. It kind of took me a long time to realise that that just wasn't the most efficient way of working. The main reason for that is that there's just so much more content at medical school than there is at A-level, and so the sort of traditional methods you might have used, you know, like making mind maps or making nice colourful notes and highlighting them, for me they didn't work as well. And there also aren't as many past papers as there were when we did A-levels or when you did whatever exams you did before uni. We pretty much only would have like one mock paper for each year of medical school. There'd be formative assessments throughout the year, which we could also use, but there was nothing like the kind of 30 papers that you could do for A-level biology to practice the questions. So the way of learning is very different. So my second tip is to make sure that when you're working, you're really optimising that time that you're spending working. And often I think it takes you to actually ask yourself, am I actually learning content here? Or am I just doing something else? Am I just kind of going through the motions of studying? And I think when I look back to sort of first and second year, especially during revision time, I would spend hours and hours in the library and I would feel like I'm revising, but actually all I was doing was copying my set of notes from one bit of paper into another bit of paper. And although that feels productive and it gave me a physical result so I could see, oh look, I've written 10 pages today, this has been really productive, that result that I had got from the work wasn't actually going to be reflective in the exam, because what I really needed to be doing was actually learning the material in the best way possible. And for me, I don't think that copying out notes or just going through notes is the best way for me to do that. So that brings me on to my next bit of advice, and that is, if you work in the same way as me, in that copying notes over isn't the optimal way for you to actually learn the information, then you need to change the way you're studying so that you're spending less time doing these mindless activities and spending more time actually testing yourself and going over the content properly. And the way I look at this now is I see studying as two different things. One type of studying for me is creating revision resources, and I'll explain later in the video what resources I actually make now. But this is where you're taking that information from the lectures or from a textbook or whatever you're using, and you're synthesising it in a way that makes sense to you in a format that you like, and you're picking out the key bits of information that you need to learn and putting that into something so that you can later revise. The other type of studying is where you're actually using that revision resource to learn the material and to go over and over and over and over it again and again until you can remember it all. And so for me, I want to make that synthesising of the information as small as possible, because that's when I'm not really learning anything. So I want that to be sort of less than 10% of my study time, and I want 90% of my study time to be the actual learning of the content. And so the only way that I can do that is by making sure that when I'm making revision resources, it's as efficient and as quick as possible. So the way that I do that is I simply copy and paste. I don't handwrite anything, I don't type out my own notes, I don't even focus on laying it out in a way that I like, because a lot of people are very visual learners, and I am quite a visual learner, but for me that comes a lot later on when I'm doing the final stages of learning the material. I don't want to spend hours and hours making a really pretty poster and then end up not really using the poster that much. So I copy and paste everything, and then the 90% of my study time is me actually testing myself. So that brings me on to my next point, and that is that active recall and spaced repetition for me is just the best method to learn content. There are loads and loads of videos out there on YouTube about active recall and spaced repetition. I probably made a few on my channel, but essentially it's that you're going over things in a way that is forcing your brain to recall them by itself. You're not just passively reading something, and you're not just doing this once, but you're doing this repeatedly over set periods of time so that you really consolidate and cement that knowledge into your brain. And so the way that I do this now is I use the toggle feature on Notion, and every single bit of content that I need to learn is set out as questions. So I have a question, and then when you click on it, it expands the answer, and using this I can test myself. So every single time I'm revising or going over material, I'm having to recall it myself, I'm not just reading it. This has been so useful for me, and if you watched my videos last year, you'll know that I used Quizlet flashcards, so these are also really good for active recall. The only issue I had with using Quizlet was that when I wanted to edit the flashcards, or when I wanted to add extra information in or rearrange the order of the flashcards and things, I found it really difficult to use, so that's why I'm now using Notion. But both methods are really good. People use Anki flashcards as well, which I've never really tried, but apparently are really good because they sort of force you to do that spaced repetition. They force you to keep going over the same things again and again until you're confident with them. But whatever method you use, even if it's just making sure that when you're reading through your notes, you're asking yourself questions before just reading it, I really think that helped me a lot to improve my results and manage the huge amount of content. So my next tip following on from that is when you're making your resources, so whether that be flashcards, whether it be questions on Notion, whether it be just notes, whatever you want to use, like I've said, you don't want to spend ages and ages doing that because that's the most mindless part of studying. And the thing with medicine is there are so many sets of notes out there already that there's not really much point in you starting from scratch. This maybe is more relevant to the clinical years, because when I got into the clinical years I basically solely used things like Zero to Finals, which is just a website that has just all the clinical knowledge you basically need to know to pass finals. I also used notes from someone in the year above me because she'd done the whole year already, she'd made all the notes, so I might as well just use hers rather than me go through every single thing from scratch and start from the beginning, and that tends to be what everyone does in the clinical years. In the pre-clinical years I think it is a bit different because you don't have those websites like Zero to Finals which just has everything on it, because every uni is probably a bit different in terms of what you learn in the pre-clinical years and in what order. But essentially, if you can, I'd really recommend getting someone's notes from the year above so that you basically just have them there and then you can copy and paste them into whatever format you want rather than starting right from the beginning. Even if you are starting from the beginning and you're just doing everything from lectures, the same thing applies. Just copy and paste the information in the lectures. I honestly spent hours and hours handwriting notes in first and second year, and I reckon if I just copy and pasted the lecture slides into Quizlet, I could have just saved myself 90% of the time I spent, honestly. So yeah, if you're worried about not having enough time to do all the extracurricular activities you want to do, then this is your answer. My next tip is to try not to get overwhelmed with the content. I remember in first year, you're learning a lot of kind of the basic sciences and, you know, lots of biochemistry and genetics and things like that. And it can seem really irrelevant when you're learning it, and a lot of it, to be honest, does become quite irrelevant when you get to the clinical years. But there are lots of fundamental principles that you'll find over your whole medicine course you'll just come back to time and time again. An example would be something like the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. It's something you probably will learn in like first or second year, and you'll think, oh, it's another one of these like biochemical pathways I just have to learn. But it does come up again and again, and in clinical years with, you know, medications and understanding the pathology of diseases, it's really important. So there's a lot of things like that which kind of feel quite irrelevant, but later they might become relevant. And I think with medicine, it's almost the more you learn, the more everything sort of gets slotted into context and it makes more sense as a whole. So if you're just finding that it's very bitty, or you're just learning lots of random science things and you don't really know how they fit together, then just don't be overwhelmed by that, because as you progress through the year or even through all of medical school, you'll come to realise sort of how everything fits together, and you'll also come to realise what was really relevant in first year and what wasn't. Especially things like anatomy, it can seem like you're just rote learning the names of muscles and vessels and organs and everything, and it can feel quite pointless. But if you focus on that clinical context, that's going to be what becomes important later on. And having that good grounding in anatomy and physiology is really important. My final tip is more about revision. And again, this is something I've got better at as I've got into the later years of medical school. And it's that sometimes I don't think it's necessary to just revise everything again and again. So in first year, the way I revised was that I thought, okay, I've got an exam coming up for this module, so I'm just going to go through the entire module from start to finish and revise everything. And then I'd revise the whole module and I'd get to the end and I'd think, right, I've got time to revise it all again, so I'll start from the beginning again, work my way through. And I would just keep doing that, working my way through the whole module. And the issue with that is you're allocating the same amount of time to everything in that module, even though some things in the module will be really like important concepts that you need to know like the back of your hand, and some of the concepts will be really niche, very unlikely to come up in the exams. And so you're not really focusing your attention on things that are really important to know compared to things that aren't. And similarly, if you're just going through the whole module, then you're going through all the things you find easy and all the things you find hard, just sort of in the same way. So what I would recommend, and what I did a lot in fourth year, was that I would think to myself when revising, what are the things that I really don't feel confident with? And the way I'd think about it in the later years would be more, if this condition came up in an OSCE, would I be able to explain it to a patient? Would I be able to come up with a management plan for it? And if the answer was no, then I would know that that condition is something I need to go over. Whereas there will be lots of things in medicine that are so common, they come up so often, and you're just so confident with, that there's no point going over them again and again. Like if you know the treatment of hypertension already, you're fine with it, then just stop revising it. So as you come close to exams, you're focusing on things that you're really going to find difficult and that are going to get you extra marks if you then understand them. And also you're focusing less on those really niche things, and you're making sure that you've really got to grips with the important things. I think it is important to learn the niche things, because if you do want the top marks, then knowing those extra details I think do help you get the top marks. But it's all about spreading your time so that you're making sure first and foremost that you're going to comfortably pass the exam, and then you can go on and focus on those more kind of niche bits and bobs. But most of all, I'd say that looking back on the preclinical years now, I realise how nice they were, and how much, not necessarily easier in terms of learning content, but how much easier they were in terms of just logistics, in that you just go to lectures every day, you'd sit with your friends, you'd come home, you'd do a bit of work. And it's very different when you're on placement, and then you have often a lot more contact hours, you're having to go to different hospitals, you're having to move around lots. And so just enjoy the preclinical years as much as you can, and that's your time to do all your extracurricular activities, go out lots, have fun. And yeah, so I hope this video has been helpful. If it has, then give it a thumbs up, and remember to subscribe to my channel, and hopefully I'll see you very soon for another video. Thanks for watching, bye!